What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 432 of Opinions May Vary. I'm your host, JR. Joining me, as always, one of my best friends in the whole wide world is my wonderful co-host, Alex.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good. That's beautiful.
Mhm.
I don't have any weather updates. It's just been very rainy. Very rainy New England. In case anyone who's new to this, I always mention the weather because I'm in my mid-30s, and that's what's important to me these days. Joining us this week, this is kind of exciting because this is a longtime friend of ours. And when I say long time, like, I think I've known this person pretty much as long as I've known Alex. Like, goes way back to the old days of the amusement park. Pretty excited for this. And we are joined by Mr. Paul Drechsler-Martell. Paul, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited.
This is going to be a fun one because we're talking. I don't know if we've ever really gone deep into what we're going to get into what Paul does in a moment. I do need to preface it though with a quick story into my introduction kind of Paul, because we all worked at local theme park way back in the day. I'm talking like fresh out of high school. Me was 2006, 2007, and at the time, like, they're all like the different divisions. So you worked not exclusively, but you worked mainly with like one set group of people. And then there are other people in the other divisions doing their kind of thing. And so like me and Paul never really crossed paths too much. It was pretty rare. And then it was some sort of hangout. I can't remember what was happening. We were at a friend's house and like someone put on like a homemade video of shit. I can't remember exactly what it was, but part of that video involved Paul standing there. He was like in the middle of a park, and someone just ran up and smashed a board across his gut. And I was like, "What was that?" And like Paul and people were like, "Oh, you didn't know Paul's a fucking badass?" And I was like, "Where was this? I didn't know any of this. I thought this was just." Every now and then he's my Captain Cold, and I get to escort him on meet and greets. I had no idea that Paul had been trained and puts his body on the line for the sake of entertainment, which, again, we're going to explain what I mean when I say that. But anyways, Paul, what's it like being a total badass?
I don't know about total badass, but life is fun. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, so what you're alluding to is I am a professional stunt performer, member of SAG-AFTRA since 2014. But no, I don't know, it's a good time. Either, to be honest, I think, and I'm not sure what video you saw, much bigger fan of like sort of receiving hits than giving hits. It just ends up being more fun most of the time, getting beaten up by some other badass.
I already have a million, just diving right in, eliminating all sort of preface and casual small talk. Because right off the bat, I'm like, okay, so there's a difference. Like, are there different classes for like, okay, today we're going to learn how to crash a board across someone's body, whereas there's the day of how to take said board and not have it ruin your day.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm trying to think, to sort of give it some preface, actually, this will relate. So I did karate for a long time as a child, and being of the generation that I was like, oh, I want to do karate like the Karate Kid, and I want to like be a Ninja Turtle. And then as I got older, it's like, I want to be a Power Ranger. And then there was a show in the 90s for 2 seasons called WMAC Masters, which was
God.
I remember that one.
Dude, the best show.
Yeah, exactly. I wondered if you guys would know or remember anything. He and Nguyen, who played Tsunami on that show. And I mean, so I loved the show. And I realized recently, like looking back, it was, for those at home that don't know, it was kind of a little bit like professional wrestling or like a reality TV show, in that a lot of the cast were these martial arts forms champions, but they were also stunt performers. A lot of them worked, I think, in the Mortal Kombat movie or the Mortal Kombat game, and a lot of them were on Power Rangers. But the idea was everybody was portraying themselves And then maybe they would also go out and sort of compete as these characters, but like no mask, you knew it was the same person. So I think that kind of for a little bit made me realize as a kid, like, and particularly my brother explained, like, no, these people, like, they're on Power Rangers, they get in the suits and they do the fighting. And it like sort of put that together a little bit. But he and Gwen is actually from Vernon, Connecticut. And, you know, not that I recommend anybody stalk him or anything, but I think he's there now too. I think he still trains at the same karate school. And one time they were like, when the show was popular, they're like, we have, you know, Tsunami's going to teach a like karate and stunt fighting seminar for like kids and adults. So I have a bunch of brothers and we all do martial arts, and we all went, and I was in like 5th grade. And he taught us essentially that. We actually didn't do, because everybody does, you know, everyone does karate, so they kind of knew how to throw a punch. So all we did was on like the reactions. How do you take a punch? How do you react to a punch? And it's funny because we worked in pairs, and all the kids, you know, a bunch of them wanted to be the Power Ranger and the hero and stuff like that, and wanted to be the one throwing the punches. And I was like, man, I'm just loving these pretend reactions, pretending to get hit in the face. I'm having a great time. That's what I want to be doing. And yeah, you know, it's funny sometimes too, because there is a lot to be said about how to throw a punch or swing a board and do those things safely. But I'm often, I think a lot of the time it falls on the person reacting to it and selling to it. And you do have to know both parts. And I mean, stunts is actually very vast in its skills. If it could be pretty much anything. But yeah, so some days, you know, you're the person throwing the punch, and some days you're the person taking the hit.
I always like hearing the how someone got their start or how they wanted to start. And we have friends where I know they say, well, it's Ninja Turtles. And that's the time I grew up at, where like, I can get that. And there was always a station that had on older martial arts films. But then I grew up at a weird time where the Power Rangers weren't cool anymore. To me at least, because I aged out of them. And
yeah,
so then we're hanging out and I meet some of your friends, and I believe Jose had said like, well, he got started because of Power Rangers. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's cool. Like, if other
I feel like even I was at the age where like I wasn't supposed to be into Power Rangers, but I was. But I mean, honestly, I mean, I watch it now and I'm like, this is amazing. You know, the particularly there's the Japanese stunt team, Alpha Stunts, who I don't think was there the whole time, but has been on Power Rangers now for like 20 years. I mean, they're incredible. And every now and then when they get an episode that clearly gave them a lot of time to do a lot of fight scenes, the fight scenes are still really good by like today's standards, or by, you know, an adult standards kind of thing, I think.
Hearing that like gave me, like, opened me up to maybe I should appreciate it some more, or like not dismiss it and be a little more like respectful and understanding. And then when I started going to a lot of conventions and seeing how many cosplayers there are who are this in love with the franchise, and they're adults like me. And I'm like, okay, maybe I just didn't get it.
Yeah. I mean, everyone's into different stuff, and that's totally fine. Yeah. I mean, the crazy thing to think, I was telling somebody this the other day, is people don't realize that it's still on. But like it, and not like in reruns, that it's been going strong for what are we talking, probably like 25-ish years at this point, probably.
That sounds about right.
Thereabouts, roughly. I'm not gonna.
I mean, I remember playing Power Rangers with my friends in 3rd grade.
Right.
You know, it's just, and like collecting all the cards, and I got really mad because one of my childhood friends, Josh, he would never trade me his Green Ranger holofoil card, and I offered him like my entire collection. I just wanted that one card, and he wouldn't give it up.
And
Ridiculous.
Green Ranger was objectively the best. So
yeah, well, yeah. I mean, he had the shield thing, which you know would conveniently work one episode, and then the next episode it wouldn't do anything.
Right.
There was one time I had a bunch of friends over my place. Paul was there. We were watching pro wrestling. I think Monday Night Raw was on. And
I think I remember this.
And we're all like kind of, we're sort of watching, but not really watching. And then there's a few points where like Paul will flinch. And I'm like, what? He's like, that hurt. And I'm like, what happened? It was like Edge. I know Edge was there fighting someone else. And he's like, well, he actually hit him that time. And I'm like, oh yeah, that happens. like they know they're on TV, they know the camera's in their face, so sometimes they will actually tag each other. It happens more, like, I'm not sure what the ratio today is, but part of my I was impressed because like Paul is seeing when they connect and when they don't, which I never notice. Either they slap, it's either it looks like a fist and then they open it up to a slap at the last second, or like they throw a kick, they slap their thigh, it never actually hits the dude. And like Paul's seeing like layers more than I am.
It's incredible. I feel like whenever I see an interview, with a wrestler or something, they always talk about any wrestler that like transitions to film. They're like, oh, movie stunts is way easier. they're like wrestling is so hard. And it's just, it particularly, I mean, because it's live, it's all at once. It's so much harder on the body. They're like, we do a couple takes, we take a break for like an hour. It's great. They film a fight scene for a movie and they feel like they're on vacation by comparison.
You get like your one shot to get thrown through a window on a pay-per-view. But then on a movie, like you get thrown through a window. How'd that look? You know what? Let's bring in the second window. We got 3 more after this if we need. So just,
I suppose that is true. There are probably some things that at least if you're wrestling, you only have to do it once. There's probably that. That's true. I went to a convention once that was kind of a really sort of niche convention of like martial arts movie people. I was talking to a guy, Keith Cook, who famously known for playing Reptile in the first Mortal Kombat and Sub-Zero in the second Mortal Kombat movie. And he was just telling random stories, and he did this one movie that was kind of like a movie with a lot of tournament fights. And I think, more or less it was filmed sort of in the same style of like wrestling. He said, well, the director had 12 cameras filming the fight scene at once all around us. And, me and the other stunt guys were like, well, how did you like obscure the fighting so that the cameras didn't notice a giant gap? Because usually you kind of play to the camera, the audience, but if they're all around you, like you can't. And he was like, yeah, we couldn't. We just hit each other.
Well,
he was like, because we knew it was impossible. So we're like, well, I guess we're just kicking each other in the face then.
Just use a different angle camera.
Yeah, I mean that is often how it goes, but I think that production was such, and whoever he had to fight was like, let's just go for it.
So I've learned a lot of stunt people get starts in martial arts because a lot of that teaches you about your body and how to fall down and how to do things semi-safely. Also, a lot comes from people in gymnastics because they're already doing flips and know how to land on pads properly. And if they're not like landing the way they want to for gymnastics, then they still have an idea of how to land where it's not going to severely injure them. I'm not sure if I've heard clowns go too, because people that go to clown school do a lot of tumbling as well. And they make decent transitions into stunt work.
Yeah, definitely. A brief history of stunts, my memory of, at least from what I know, is for a long time, stunt people, particularly when it was a male-dominated industry, and I mean, it sort of still is, but it was pretty much all men. They were ex-football players that reached a certain age and were like, well, my body's too wrecked to keep playing football. But I could still take a little hit or something, like, again, sort of similar to the wrestler thing, like, well, this is like being on vacation by comparison. And also particularly is when the John Wayne Westerns were popular. So if you were like an ex-football player that knew how to ride a horse, then, you could spend a couple decades doing stunts. There was work for you. And then there was sort of a transition. And for a long time, it was definitely a lot of gymnasts. They refer to it a lot as aerial awareness, this idea of the gymnast typically knows, in the middle of the air where they are in relation to the room. They can they know the timing and they get the feeling of like, oh, it's going to be a couple seconds before I hit the ground. I have this much time to rotate or what have you. Same thing for martial arts like myself. I started doing karate when I was 4 and, they teach you what are called break falls where it's typically for like practice being thrown, but works just as easily if you like slide on some snow or ice or something, which is just how to like fall and not stick your wrist out and break your wrist kind of thing. And then, you sort of transition that into falling on the ground safely, which I think is similar to some of, the clowning sort of pratfall type of things. What's funny is as you if you're used to doing that in martial arts and then you transition to stunts, that's another one of those things where like I'll look for, because typically what they do in the martial arts is they slap the ground to sort of absorb the impact.
Okay.
And you can tell like a good stunt person versus a bad stunt person is you'll watch and see if you can see them slap the ground. And like, so if you see them slap the ground, they're not the best stunt person. They should be able to sort of get the same motion without making it as obvious that they have like softly helped themselves down kind of a thing.
Uh-huh.
I just remembered, I feel like one of the last episodes of like Mandalorian that I watched or something, I was just like watching stormtroopers getting shot and falling and seeing like which ones looked like they were trying to help themselves down safely and which were better at obscuring it.
It reminds me of like watching movies with Alex if there's like heavy prosthetics.
Oh, I bet.
Because Alex would be like, "That was pretty good. I could barely even see the seams." And I'm like, "What are you talking? There's a monkey. He was a monkey man."
Exactly.
So you said you had a 10-minute highlight of your career of how you got to where you are now. Could we have that?
Sure.
Give us the Paul DM elevator pitch.
Yeah. I mean, we already talked about half of it, and I feel like we're kind of past that point, but I'll fill in whatever gaps. Let's see.
Well, like we can preface it because like I was even just like kind of preparing for this. So I was like, what's Paul been up to? Because like there was the famous thing a couple years ago where our whole circle of friends exploded because Paul showed up in Daredevil.
Punisher.
Like face character, like that's Paul right there. Show his face, and like he wasn't being someone else taking a punch or something like that. It was Paul, and it was really neat because it was like, holy shit, I know that person, and they're in a thing that everyone else in the world is watching. But anyways, like looking up, I was like, what's Paul been up to? Holy shit, Paul's been up to a lot. As recently as Why the Last Man, which hasn't even happened yet, and like Blacklist. I don't want to take away too much from you telling it, but like Paul's been busy. So Paul, dude, what have you been up to?
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah. Let me. I'll try to remind me if I forget. We'll talk about Daredevil at some point. As far as Why the Last Man, the funny thing about that was, as I'm sure people on the show know, that like production has been. I mean, I don't want to say cursed, but it was like in development for like 10 years. And then they were finally doing it and they're finally filming the pilot. And so I got to double the lead, Barry Keoghan, or I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but the guy from Dunkirk and Killing of the Sacred Deer. He was going to play Y or Yannick, and I got to double him. And I was like, awesome, this will be great. And then they filmed that in New York, and then they moved it to Toronto or somewhere in Canada, and then they definitely recast him. Not that they were ever gonna like bring me to Canada, but all that is to say that probably the whole pilot we shot got scrapped. And I imagine some of the cast is still there, so maybe they'll keep something. I don't know. But you definitely won't see anything that I did because because there was a change in cast. The quick version. So like I said, grew up doing karate. I didn't know, it was Ninja Turtles, and my older brother was doing karate, and I wanted to be like my older brother. So I was like, I want to do karate too. And then, but I was much more into that. Like I like to use this comparison because he later opened up his own martial arts school, but it was his mindset was always on what was practical. And that was always what appealed to him. So, his school taught jiu-jitsu and jeet kune do and all this other stuff. And I was always about like what looked flashy and what looked cool and what was fun. And we were sort of polar opposites in that way. So I wouldn't train at his school, but I was interested in the exact opposite. And so, we talked about, let's see. So then I did actually a big thing for me, there's the He and Gwen seminar. And then long story short, there was an ad in a Black Belt magazine for a stunt camp run by Michael D. Pasquale Jr. In upstate New York, and I told my parents I wanted to go to that, so I went to that for 2 summers in high school, and that's where I learned like the basics of like reactions and, you know, how to take a hit and how to do, you know, different stunts, as well as it was really geared towards martial artists and people who hadn't been on set. So they would go over just like what it's like to be on set, what an audition is like, etc. And Mike was also trying to form like a stunt group or a stunt network. So after my first year there, about a month later, he called me for an audition for a Nike commercial. And my older brother, same brother, drove me, and we went. And it was a football commercial. I mean, long story short, I don't know how, but I did end up getting it. And then great like insight and foreshadowing into things to come. Did the Nike commercial. Was like, oh my God, this will be awesome, so exciting. Barely did anything when I was there, and then they never aired it either. So you know. But that's how that goes. And you know what? That was, I think, a good, helpful first experience, because it just really showed me what things could be like. So I was still in high school at that point. My parents were like, we'd really like you to go to college. And so I did do that. And I could join SAG just by being the Screen Actors Guild, just by being a part of that commercial, even though it didn't air. But my parents thought an education would be important, and I had a great time in college. And what I did a little bit was I worked on other smaller stuff for a while, and then I didn't join the Screen Actors Guild till 2014. Also in the middle there, super important, was in 2005 when I auditioned to work at the local theme park we all worked at. And then that was a great example of, I could do the fight stuff in the audition, and they were like, you know, how do you feel about a high fall? And I was like, okay, because I had done it before, but not super high. And then they were like, how do you feel about riding a dirt bike? And I was like, I'll figure it out. So my employment was contingent on sending them a video of me riding a dirt bike, which I eventually did. I had an uncle who was able to show me. And then, you know, I worked on that stunt show. And the great thing there was, you know, once I was on the show, you know, I gained more experience. They taught me the high falls. That's my best high fall experience, was working on that show, my sort of best high fall guidance. And same with the dirt bikes, you know, got more comfortable working on the show. And I think that happens some of the time, is that you sort of get this on the job training. Mm. Yeah. And I mean, you know, I met a lot of great people in that time. Bonsai Vitale was a big deal, who I think was also a Power Ranger. He was the stunt coordinator in the show. You know, I met people like the Harvey brothers, mm-hmm. Bob and Greg, who also worked at a number of theme parks. And I think they did stunts at that same park maybe a year or two before I was there. So we didn't meet at that time, but we kind of, we ended up seeing each other around and stuff like that. And I still see them from time to time. Greg hired me on a show. They both give me recommendations. They both also super helpful, gave me recommendations early, because a lot of stunt stuff is networking and people vouching for you. Mm-hmm. So I think they were really helpful for, particularly, I ended up working a lot on Gotham, and they were in good with the coordinator there. And I think because their names were on my resume, they gave me good recommendations that led to a lot of work on Gotham. So, yeah. And then, from there, you know, just working when I can. So Daredevil. Daredevil was funny. Right, Daredevil, as you mentioned, it's funny because Daredevil is, like you said, this like clean shot of, it's me. It's not like most of the time where like my parents want to see what I did, and I have to be like, okay, let me send you a picture where if you pause it right here, you can kind of see the left side of my face. See how that like sort of looks like me for a second? Like Daredevil was just nice and big and obvious. I think there was even a character name. Yeah. It's like Kelly Cooley or something. It was never on the call sheet or anything, because I don't think it's ever said in the show, even though it's on like the Marvel Wiki. I don't remember if they specifically said your name or just referenced you as like the son as the previous boss. So you're the new boss. Right. Well, I think I was the boss's son. And I mean, for anyone who's unfamiliar or just needs a refresher, it's season 2, episode 1. Essentially, I'm the mob boss's son that the Punisher kills, that just sort of sets off the events of a lot of season 2. Because then he shows up for revenge about 4 episodes later. That was a funny one because so at that point I'd maybe been working a couple of years, and I was, by the way, super stoked to work on Daredevil just as like a comic book geek and stuff. And I was so excited. But like, you know, traditionally if you work on a show, say like do it in post, which they do a lot now, but they would traditionally give me 1 or 2 squibs and be like, you'll have 1 or 2 squibs. When I worked on Daredevil, they're like, here's your jacket of squibs. There's 9 on there. And then even like we had the safety meeting and, you know, the crew was like, okay, so just so you know, we've got most of the stuff on the table. The glasses and stuff is wired to explode. This wall over here is wired to explode. This wall over here is wired to explode. So pretty much don't touch anything. It's probably charged to explode. So
being told like, yeah, you can't move from this spot. And you're like, but I'm supposed to fall down.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I'm trying to act here, man.
I know.
So this is a dumb question. You could usually tell who's like good at getting shot and who's bad at getting shot. And how do you train yourself for the reacting, for the taking an impact of a bullet that doesn't exist? Or do you feel the squib go off? And like, at what point do you just, well, you know, I probably wouldn't be flinching to the 7th bullet and I should just die now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it kind of depends. You know, it's funny that you mentioned like reacting to the squib, because on that one specifically, they told us they were trying something different because I think they also had a couple actors squibbed, and they don't, at least at the time, they didn't traditionally do this, was they sort of put a layer between the squib and our clothes a little bit. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the more experienced stunt guys I was with were saying they didn't like it. And I could understand because you actually didn't feel it as much. Mm-hmm. So you were like, did the squib go off just now? Like I couldn't tell, you know, and sometimes you were kind of late to it for that reason because you wouldn't fully feel it. And sometimes, you know, when it gives you like a little bit of a pop, you know, I mean, honestly, you kind of just go with it because you're feeling it anyway. So just exaggerate that motion. I think typically when you see a bad gunshot reaction, it's the person anticipating it a little bit. You know, they're like worried, or maybe even, you know, they know what they're supposed to do and maybe they're getting shot in the shoulder. So the shoulder starts to move before the squib goes off kind of thing. And, you know, I mean, part of that's nerves and it's just experience and just, you know, waiting for it, and waiting for then it to guide you and take you. The one you see a lot sometimes too is someone dies and then, and I've been guilty of this one. You die and you fall on the ground, but then for whatever reason, you're like, I'm on the ground, I need to be stiff. And then it's almost like, you know, like a possum or something. And you're like, your like hand is like up in the air, but you're like, well, I'm dead, so I can't move. And then, you know, everyone's just like, that looks terrible.
There's a lot of subconscious stuff that I hadn't thought of. It's again in wrestling, it's called the sell. Like you sell when you get punched and you sell when you get hit versus reacting, or taking the shot. And if it's okay, do stunt people watch like the shitty internet gore videos to be like, here's how you like, you know, we just watched a street hit somewhere. And this is how a real person like goes limp and their body drains. And it's like, okay, I have to try and do that now. Or do you just maintain the fantasy?
Well, yeah, no, it's a good question. So I'll start with actually a non-stunt example just because it's on my mind. Mm-hmm. I remember, so I had to later be in Daredevil as the same character in a coffin. Mm-hmm. And I'm just being dead. And I don't think you can even see me on camera or anything. But it was funny when they were putting the makeup on, they were like, well, he'd be like, my character's been shot through the head, but he should be cleaned up. But also, if it were reality, they would fully clean him up so that, like, there is no gunshot wound, but we need to remind the audience who this character is. Mm-hmm. So we need to kind of have like a whole part of a wound there kind of thing, even though, but we need it to look at like it's been cleaned up, and we need to sort of ride that line. Stunts, it is that kind of thing. I think sometimes when you watch like boxing, every now and then, I think of this a lot. You see someone get knocked out, and you're just like, I don't understand. What was that? He looks like he barely hit him. Like, I don't get it. But that's because that's what knockouts look like in reality. And I think, people do watch that stuff, absolutely. But again, it kind of depends what the goal of the project is. And if we're going for really reality kind of thing, then those are good to watch and see like how a body falls when it gets hit. But then oftentimes you do sort of have to overdo it. And a lot of it is to tell that story to the audience. Part of it, for example, too, I use this one a lot. When we worked at the local theme park, they used to, say a lot, you need to make this big because the people in the back need to be able to see it. Mm-hmm. And, you don't have a camera and a close-up to tell what happens. So you need to make this, this punch or this head reaction huge, because there are people way far away who are not going to be able to tell what's happening if you don't make it 10 times bigger than you normally would.
Right.
Yeah.
I was having this conversation with my girlfriend when I told her we were going to be talking to you, and it's weird. I guess I almost want to take a poll of listeners and friends, because I realize like spooky kids that want to get into movies watch horror mostly, and they do makeup or figure effects to simulate horror effects. And then I was like, does that mean that the stunt people are jock kids because they can do physical things? And I was like, no, they're also nerds because they watch martial arts movies. And I was like, so at what point, I was trying to figure out if there was a way to predict like what people would want to get into. But really that it's more of a lead in into making stuff yourself. Like how many people film home movies and try to do their own makeup for a zombie film, and you've shown me, and I've been in one of your movies of like doing moves and martial arts and like throw some jokes in or just trying to look cool. And is this to have fun, or is it to add to your stunt reel? And so at what point do you like, well, I want to do the fun thing versus, well, I can't do it in Hollywood yet, but we can do it from home. Like how do you get to those steps?
Well, let me backtrack for a second. I would actually, stunts is particularly interesting because I think with only me, there's not too many fields that really, in my mind, combine this sort of athleticism and art. Mm-hmm. Dance has that, and a couple other things, but it is this really interesting combination because you do actually, there are a good amount of stunt people that I would say are the sort of stereotypical jock type. It's not everybody. And I kind of, when I went into it, kind of assumed that's what everybody would be like, this sort of, Burt Reynolds, Hooper kind of guy's guy, tough guy kind of thing. Uh-huh. And, those personalities are there, but it's not everybody. And right, there are the nerds and other folks. And the wrestlers and the gymnasts and everybody. I think, certain things depend. Some things sort of depend logistically in terms of if you enjoy. Oftentimes you do sort of have to film stuff yourself in the same way that like a makeup artist might have to put together. They do a lot of trials of their own and their own portfolio and things like that, because that's the only way you get better. And particularly if you're doing fight stuff, the best way to learn that a lot of people recommend is, you take a fight scene from a movie you've watched a ton of times, and then you try to recreate it. Mm-hmm. Because chances are there's a ton of stuff that you missed. And you spend a while just looking at it going, why does this look so much worse than the thing that like I just watched? I copied all the steps, and there's a whole bunch of subtleties that you're missing. I think I'm trying to think sort of what the differences of the stages are. I think like most things in life, it just sort of, the stages sort of happen gradually. You sort of keep evolving to a degree. And I think also, if anything, as you evolve, you maybe eventually realize, maybe this isn't for me. Or like I had a friend too at one time who was like, he was sort of getting into stunts a little bit, and we were working on these much smaller projects together. And he was like, honestly, I just want to do the stunt. Like, I just want to do the parkour, the whole like sitting around waiting for them to like change the camera and everything or change the angle and all this other stuff. He's like, it's actually, for like the 12 hours of the weekend or whatever, it was, like 20 minutes of excitement. I'd rather just go rock climb for like 2 hours. And I think you find that as you go along, as you evolve, you decide how much you want to do it. It's tough to guide people, I think, on that, because there's definitely, and I think in general, people are becoming more aware of this, that sometimes making the thing you love that brings you joy, turning that into a career is sometimes a negative, because sometimes it sucks the joy out of what you love. That's a big part of it. For me, I know, one of the reasons I took forever to join SAG was I looked at the stunt people that I knew who were people like the Harvey brothers. And those guys can kind of do anything. They do cars, they do fire. I think they had done some circus stuff. They ride motorcycles, they do fights, they do wire stuff. And I was like, I am nowhere near on their level, so I don't think that I'm ready yet. And then when I got a more awareness of sort of the range of stunt performers, I was like, okay, not everybody working is on that level. So maybe I can start, I can join the union and work my way up to, which I'm still nowhere near their level, but I can work up to something like that.
I'm guessing it's not something that you could do by yourself. Like, you need someone to help. So, like, you need someone to hit you with a board.
I tried, I did, I'm trying to think if I did this more than once. I definitely did one time, I remember, because I felt like that was the hard part, was I didn't know. There were times in which I felt like I didn't know people, or people didn't have as much time as I did or want to work on as much. Mm-hmm. And I think I at one time filmed myself fighting an invisible man in the snow. Okay. And so I just, threw myself around kind of thing, because I could just set the camera up on the tripod and then just do it. But yeah, not only do you need other people, but I think like anything, particularly if you can have some kind of a mentor, that is a huge help. And that is, stunts is a little easier to get into now because of the internet for a number of different reasons. But it used to sort of be a little closed off, and you really needed like a mentor and somebody to vouch for you and somebody to teach you too, because there weren't really classes, there weren't really camps. You had to somehow make friends with somebody who was much more experienced than you that was willing to show you some of it. And from there, and obviously that is still the best way to learn. Because even if I'm working with somebody less experienced than me, I love giving them a heads up on like, hey, I did this thing on set last week. Don't do this. Or here's a mistake I made 10 years ago. Yeah. I'm telling you now so you don't make the same one. Mm-hmm. Combined to sometimes set just ends up being with scenes, there's sometimes things you would never predict and you would never plan for. Mm-hmm. I had to double Josh Hutcherson once, and he had to fall out of a chair, tied to a chair, while he'd accidentally taken Viagra. So again, sort of one of those, no one does a class that says, how to do this is how you fall out of a chair while you're tied to it with something around your eyes, and also you're wearing a strap on. But then of course, once I did that, I could tell all my friends, hey guys, this is how you fall out of a chair when you're tied to it with a blindfold and a strap on.
So one of the lucky times I was hanging out with you and your stunt friends, And I believe it was Morgan who was telling a story where she's like, oh yeah, I tried to go to a set and hustle my way in. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, you figure out where like the stunt coordinator goes for lunch and you just go there and ask him if he needs anyone. And I'm like, what? This was more than 10 or so years ago. And I'm like, it can't be that easy. Like, don't you need a referral of some kind? Don't you, like, they should be calling you. You can't go to set. And I'm like, nope, there's been wrestling shows where a guy shows up with his gear bag and goes, you need someone for first 2 matches? Because I could give you 5 minutes.
Nice. Yeah, no, that's totally, I mean, obviously, so the interesting thing is, I mean, that used to be how it was done. And there was still a fair amount of that, although it did kind of turn digital a lot. And some coordinators preferred that. Sometimes it was hard because, you know, it's pretty easy to ignore an email. And it's a little bit harder when someone shows up and is right in front of your face, then they at least, you know, might give you a little time. But at the same time, you know, stunt coordinators are busy and they don't necessarily need people coming up and bothering them when they're trying to work.
Yeah.
There's pros and cons. And, you know, I've heard stories of way before my time when, again, that was the only way you could get jobs was to hustle. That's what it was called. You would just show up to set. And I mean, typically when that thing kind of happens, it was never like, well, at least in my experience, it was never, hey, great, I need somebody right now. I did, though. I mean, I hustled, what was it? The third Purge movie filmed in Rhode Island. And I showed up and I did that thing, and the stunt coordinators were carrying the mats. I was like, can I help you guys carry the mats? And they're like, yeah, sure. I was like, explain that I was there to hustle. And they were like, yeah. And then they were like, oh, you know, we need some people to get shot tomorrow. Can you just show me a gunshot reaction right here with the mats? And did a couple for them. And they were like, great. Well, we'll double check that production likes, you know, and I had handed them headshot and resume, physical copy. And they were like, great, you know, we'll double check with production that they still need people, but we might need a few guys tomorrow. Well, the show was filming nights too. So they were like, you'll probably get texted at like 4 a.m. Keep your phone on. Like, don't be asleep. And then I did, and I worked the next day, you know. And at the same time, I had one time I went to a set and tried to hustle, and I mean, was very respectful and didn't do anything I wasn't supposed to do, but the crew was very protective of the set, so they had the police escort me off. That was a first. That only happened that one time, and that's not typical, but that does happen. I've heard stories of before my time, people had to be more creative about it, like, I guess there was one guy who used to always like bring pizza and just pretend he was a pizza delivery and he'd be like, oh, hey, yeah, no, I know it's a close set, pizza delivery, you know, and he's like, no, I got a call. It's for so-and-so over here. And, you know, and then he would try and find the coordinator, or common knowledge a lot of the time would say don't hustle in groups, that was kind of, you know, overwhelming sort of thing, and bothersome. But I think there were times in which I heard stories of like, say, like, since 6 stunt guys would show up to set, and there would be like 2 security guards, and they'd be like, well, they can't chase all of us at once. So, you know, we're all going to make a break for it. And hopefully only 2 of us will get left behind, and hopefully it won't be me. And they would just like, bum rush it.
I feel like movie making isn't as planned as I thought it was, because a frequent guest of ours, KT, has been on our show a number of times.
Oh, yeah.
She was one of the Russians in that Purge movie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so she's like, I got paid extra because I can speak fluent Russian.
Yeah,
but she's one of the bad guys in the mask that's like on the cover, on the poster, and everything. And
cool.
She's explaining. She's like, yeah, I show up to set, and the makeup artist like starts making the mask on me, and I'm like, what? Like, they didn't have that prepared. She's like, no, they wanted it to fit to my face, but he's doing like the latex and cotton ball thing just to form it and shape it, and then peel it off and like let it harden and paint it up, and now that's her mask. I think she was flag face. And I'm like, these are things they're going to market, like, and sell in Halloween stores. And they just made it on the spot. Like, there wasn't like marketing directors, like, deciding how the mask is supposed to look and tell her to change, make edits and everything, like everything else in movies. I think, this dude, Andy Park, who does like, art design for Marvel, will go through 50 to 100 different costume versions for the next Captain America suit or the Black Panther suits. And then it's like, oh, I just built this mask like right here, just in the past 10 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, well, it definitely depends. And, and that's a great comparison. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the makeup artist who made the mask was given, if there were a lot of meetings prior to that of what it should look like, and he didn't pull it completely out of the sky. And it may also have been the kind of thing where they're like, hey, we're going to use some of your masks in marketing, or just keep that in mind. And, if it came out like garbage, they would have just picked a different one, kind of deal. I think also, there's a big difference in terms of budget on those shows. And, do they want to pay the makeup artist the weeks to develop the several Captain America suits to get, and then, when you're dealing with Marvel also, there's sort of a lot of approval and things like that goes into it.
Yeah.
Versus, if you're a Purge property, there's a lot less of.
You might not have 6 action figures.
Right, exactly. Well, and also just, there's not the sort of, I'm trying to think the IP that hasn't been around as long. We have to think about. But you also sort of just have, in general, I think, there's a budgetary difference. And you'll see that a lot with a lot of different things. And this comes up with stunts all the time because, the Marvel movies, the fight scenes in those are great, but it's also because they have the money to spend a lot of time on it. And then sometimes when you see a movie where the action's not so great, that can be because, they had to film it in an afternoon or in like 2-3 hours. And sorry, that reminds me of something earlier that the thought left and it came back, which is we were talking about the stunt falls and things like that. And one interesting thing from a stunt perspective is that depending on the show you're on, you have to sell it more or less depending on the vibe. And I know, for example, a lot of the folks in New York, a lot of the shows that are done are like a lot of police procedurals, and it's supposed to have a more lifelike feel. So we kind of tone it down a bit to make it look a little bit more realistic and sometimes underwhelming. But like I had friends who worked on the third John Wick movie. And then, that was more of a hyper realism. So they had to readjust to that. Or I have another friend who works on a lot of Marvel stuff. And he had been working a lot of superhero stuff for a while. And he said, I had to come back to New York and then remember like, oh, right, I got to tone down everything, tone down the way I stand, the way I punch, the way I fall. I'm not being a superhero with superpowers. I'm just being the average dude. And he had to dial in his muscle memory of what he'd been doing for the last year or two.
I want to talk about, because I feel like being a stuntman, while, especially from the outside looking in, my body is a mess. It is a horror show, trying to make it better, but y'all need to be in tune with your bodies. You need to take care of your bodies because your body is your livelihood, and you also make a living beating the shit out of said body. How important is like representation and also like visibility when it comes to making sure that everything is safe on a set? We've talked about this briefly with like voice actors and people who will literally blow out their vocal cords for the sake of getting a role and barely get compensated, no residuals or anything. Like, it's kind of a sad situation. And like I had seen that you'd shared a story about an ex-stunt woman who just finally won like an 11-year battle.
Oh yeah.
With lawsuits and because her body had taken a beating over the years. And I'm not sure really. I really have a question here, but really just I'm looking for your opinion, your thoughts, and just what you have, what it's like coming from someone who's actually in the business who has to deal with this kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm trying to think sort of just a number of thoughts. And I mean, for anyone who's not familiar, yeah, Leslie Hoffman, who was in the first Nightmare on Elm Street, she's the hall pass girl, but she was a stunt performer. And yeah, thankfully she just got a settlement. That was kind of, some of it was about her stunt injuries. That was also sort of just a lot of BS from the SAG-AFTRA health plan not wanting to pay the disability she was owed. It was more of kind of a legal thing. But yeah, I'm happy that it finally went her way as it legally was supposed to. In terms of, I remember a fellow stunt person one time and I think this is a great way to summarize it, was he was just talking about how his workouts have changed as he's gotten older. And now it's just about prehabilitation, and he's changed his workouts to just avoid getting hurt. It's like lifting is less about, looking good and getting huge biceps and stuff like that. It's just making sure that everything's working. That I think a lot of people, as they get older, it tends to be a lot more, say about stretching and things like that. And in the martial arts, a lot of people will say, and what was it? Daniel Wu from Into the Badlands wrote a really good piece about that, about what martial arts training in his 40s was like and how he films the show with that in mind. And it turned into, a lot less intense workouts and more yoga and stretching. And a lot of martial artists you'll still sort of throw your kicks, but you'll do them a lot slower because it's better on the joints. And you're still working the muscle and you're still working the technique, but you're saving your joints a little bit, which is nice. But it's true. You do kind of have to keep that stuff in mind. And it is, I get it because I was in the same place, but similar to your story about the voiceover artists, I hear or see some people really trying to hurt themselves because they're young and they're green. And I understand what it's like being in that place, but you do sort of have to keep in mind that it's not going to last forever and it is going to catch up with you. I hurt my body, honestly, way more in everyday stuff. But my worst injuries are every day. And the stunts, thankfully, knock on wood, have been not that bad. And part of that is just technique and form. I remember watching a documentary about a Hong Kong stunt guy who did this crazy stunt. I'll have to send it to you guys. He fell off like a bridge, like a highway overpass, onto a moving 18-wheeler, bounced off that and hit a van that was also moving, and then landed on the street. And it was like on this one movement, both cars moving, falls off the bridge, hits one, bounces off that, hits the other, hits the ground. And this guy is amazing and legendary. And he was like, well, I knew that there was pretty much only two ways this could go, which is either I would be totally fine and not feel a thing, or dead. Obviously it was the former. And that's the thing, is there is stuff that hurts, but every now and then you're like, no, if you get this move just right, you won't feel a thing. And that's where your training comes in.
It's you got to think long-term longevity over, there's a really, I'm big into, I've talked about it previously on the show, but there's a new wrestling organization, AEW, that I'm very much into. And one of their top people is this guy, Darby Allin, who has pretty much made a career out of obliterating himself. He does insane bumps. Sometimes he just looks like a pinball, like the way he's just ricocheting off things. And everyone says, like, man, enjoy it now because Darby's not going to be around for very long.
Yeah.
And he's even said, like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you first, please.
I was just going to say, like, he's even commented, like, I don't plan on doing this forever. So, like, I'm getting it in while I can. Like, that's obviously not the exact quote, but he recognizes the danger that he puts himself in, and that he's not going to be the Shawn Michaels wrestling for 40 years or however long he's been doing it. But anyways, yes, go ahead.
No, that's a great point. I'm a huge Jackie Chan fan, and he will admit this too, which is that particularly the way movies were made in Hong Kong, in sort of a little bit more of this like run and gun, figure it out on the way to the ground kind of thing. That he said, we just do it. He was like, these Hollywood movies take forever because they're doing all this planning, and we would just be like, I'm going to jump from this roof to that roof kind of deal. I think particularly as he got older and started working in Hollywood, one thing that was, he knows that they do kind of save themselves a bit by taking the time to plan certain things, and you can sort of limit the amount of stress you put on your body by taking the time to prepare and think about it pragmatically versus just like going for it and see what happens. And, if it hurts, we'll just try it again and do it differently kind of deal. Yeah. He's kind of exceptional in that way, that he's had such a long career having done that much to his body. I think I heard a Hollywood stunt performer at one point sort of comment on that they had sort of watched him work, and they were like, Jackie Chan will just go for it, but his body pays for it. Like, you see it happen big time.
Did you ever see there used to be a YouTube channel, Every Frame a Painting?
I'm familiar with it, but I didn't watch it, no.
He does that. He did a neat video because like people like me don't recognize good stunts and fighting and cinematography, like, you know, when it's presented. So it was a nice eye opener. Like I highly recommend that channel. He doesn't make videos anymore. He kind of retired. He was done. But the stuff that he did make was very cool. And he did one video all about how Jackie Chan is like the master of like, I can't remember Alex, you might remember the way he put it.
I might have seen that one because I know there have been a lot of videos about, you know, why Jackie Chan is as good as he is. But I think there was one that was particularly well presented and articulated, and it was probably that one. So I probably have seen it. Yeah, it was a lot about sort of the shot composition of how the stunts go. Yeah.
The white suit and black suit.
Yes. Specifically, it was about action comedy.
Yeah.
And like it showed how a lot of movies these days they'll have a lot of cuts to like try and accentuate a hit, but really it just ends up looking flat, especially compared to like the old and it's like, man, I've been watching Jackie Chan movies since I was like 5, and I never even realized any of this stuff. You just don't appreciate how good it is until someone points it out sometimes.
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's taking a lot in me not to just talk about WMSC Masters. Because
we could do like a whole other episode on that. Let me just tell you, by the way, I'm pretty sure someone uploaded the whole series to YouTube.
Ooh.
Because you can't like get it on DVD or anything.
Right.
I fell down like maybe about a year ago, maybe a little more than that, because time has no meaning right now. I randomly literally Googled. I was like, what's that show?
Yeah.
The martial arts and the belt thing. And it was like the first result. It knew exactly what I was looking for.
You weren't the first person to search it under those words exactly.
And I remember I reached out to our good friend Brett just on our last episode, a very good friend of the show, a good friend of pretty much everyone. And I was like, Brett, have you ever heard of this show? And he's like, used to watch it every Saturday. And like we spent like 2 hours talking about like our favorite people and all that stuff. But it was always tough growing up because like they never showed the episodes in order. So like one episode, my man Superstar would get some guy's pendant, and you know, after winning, but then the next episode he would only have like, he'd be missing some. I'm like, man, like this already happened. What's going, like, show him in order. So I'm gonna need to go and hunt him down on YouTube to actually like see who does it. I don't know. Does anyone actually win? Did it run long enough for a winner?
They follow, you know, sort of a tournament style format. I mean, it's funny, that was not my experience. Mine was actually that I recall, I think in season 2, I realized that I could watch it on Saturday on one channel, and then on Sunday they would rerun it. So I would like on a different channel. So I would watch it like twice each weekend. I still have it, but I taped it off TV. So I mean, I still have the whole thing on VHS, which I would pull out on occasion. I'm really upset that like they haven't made DVDs of that yet.
It's like it's money waiting to happen. Leaving money on the table for, you know, like the 6 people who really thought that show was cool.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think. I mean, aside from just talking about how awesome the entire cast is, I'm trying to think because, you know, one of my brothers will bring this up too, is he'll just be like, so how many people from that show have you met at this point? Or like worked with? And I'm just trying to think about who have I met? I met Willie the Bam Johnson, because he'll do some of the sort of conventions and stuff. We talked about Hina Gwen. I worked for a while on a couple. Christine Bannon Rodriguez, who played Lady Lightning, has a school in Rhode Island. She lives in Rhode Island. And so we worked on a small project together. I'll run into her once in a while. I feel like there's somebody else who for some reason is not coming to me. But yeah, I mean, that whole show is amazing. Some of those people are still working a ton now, coordinating stuff, or appearing in things. And then probably, I feel like most famously, you have Sophia Crawford, who was Chameleon, became Buffy's double for Sarah Michelle Gellar for Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Mm-hmm. I distinctly remember Brett's favorite was Machine.
Oh, yeah.
Who one of the few episodes that I did find on YouTube was actually Machine's backstory and how, I can't remember, but he fights like a machine. Whatever. It's a great show. It's just hokey in the best ways, and it's just like Saturday morning cartoons, but it's real life, and it's like Mortal Kombat meets. It's so good. Anyways,
and again, I mean that's a lot of like stunt people in their early days too. I'm just sort of thinking about it. There was, because you had Chris Casamassa, who was Red Dragon, famously played Scorpion in Mortal Kombat. Ho Sung Pak famously was Liu Kang in the video game.
Mm-hmm.
Right. He was Superstar. But then you also have, I mean, like some of the stunt doubles even, or Hakeem Alston was in the Mortal Kombat movie as well. But some of the stunt people, I think there's a very famous stunt coordinator, Clayton Barber, who I think did the fights for season 2 of Iron Fist. And he was just, random ninja or something on WMAC Masters.
God, the show kicked ass. Okay, back to business. I wanted to talk about the past year. So obviously the past year has been very difficult for pretty much everything, unless your name is Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. How has it been being a stuntman throughout a global pandemic where, I don't want to say like everything didn't shut down, but it was certainly impacted?
Yeah, I mean, well, the majority of productions did shut down, at least for a few months. I think there are some movies maybe happening on the down low. Someone was telling me the other day that they were on some sort of small movie when the pandemic happened, and the production was kind of, I think they checked in with everybody, but they said, listen, you're kind of like an insular group. You want to spend another 2 weeks finishing this thing and, don't go to the bar kind of deal. And it's interesting though. So, I mean, long story short, they reopened sort of in the fall. Productions were sort of starting back up again, but tons of COVID testing and COVID precautions. And I mean, I could still tell you, someone told me, they were like, yeah, I had a job. This was just a month ago. They're like, yep, I had a job. And then I got a text like the night before that's like, someone on the set has COVID, nobody show up. And, had to get delayed another week or what have you. It's different. One of the biggest things stunt-wise is, as you could just guess, stunts for the most part, unless we're driving cars or something, it's a very personal face-to-face kind of thing, and it's a lot of interacting. So I think for a lot of productions, they just, they cut the stunt budget kind of thing, and they cut the stunts sort of all together out of an abundance of caution for the virus, which I 100% don't blame them. So work was slow for myself for a while. I worked on Blacklist, and the coordinator was telling me, and I'd worked on the show before. I forget what episode it was, but this is, post-pandemic. And he was like, you're the 10th person I've hired this season. And for this show, we were like, I don't know, 6 episodes in. And he was like, usually, I'm hiring like 10 people an episode. And right. It was just, the numbers were drastically decreased. I think now, particularly now that people can get vaccinated, I think that's changed. A couple of weeks ago was part of like a 30-person stunt team doing a scene, and we all still had to wear masks and get tested and do a bunch of other things. But yeah, it definitely, I think, and it's tough as cases are starting to rise again. I think it could be, we could see stunts taking a hit again, or, taking a little while to come back to the way that it was. Most recently in the news, it's sort of like a gray area, but SAG-AFTRA has, and a number of other unions had said they would support any production that wants to mandate everyone get vaccinated in order to work. Obviously, people have a lot of different feelings about that, which I could understand. And some people are very opposed opposed to this idea that it'd be mandated that they get vaccinated to work, and there's some legal issues with that. But that's sort of the way it's heading right now. You know, someone seemed to make a good point that, like, similarly, you usually have to get vaccinated to go to college. Most colleges will require their students to be vaccinated. That's just how it's been for as long as I've always known it. And that might just be where we're headed with filming. And, you know, the stunt people that don't want to get vaccinated may just no longer end up working. I don't know. It's an interesting time. Like I said, it was really quiet for me. I worked on a couple jobs last year, not a ton this year so far. But, I mean, that's sort of where we're at in this sort of interim transition. We'll see what happens.
Right. All right, Paul, as we get to the end of the show here, typically we like to give people a couple minutes to kind of plug either. I mean, we've talked about the stuff that you've been in. I'm not sure if there's anything that you wanted to, anything that's coming up that you're going to be a part of, or anything, if there's a website, or even if it's just an IMDB page. Where can people go if they wanted to find more of your stuff?
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, in typical stunt fashion, I was in Free Guy, the Ryan Reynolds movie. You won't see me in that, you know, because that's how stunts goes. I worked on this movie called Jane, which filmed in Hartford, that is about women's abortion rights. I'm super excited to check it out when it comes out. I worked on that. You won't see me there either. And, you know, I just worked on an episode of Marvelous Miss Maisel. You won't see me there either. But that's how that goes. I mean, yeah, you can, you know, IMDB me, Paul Drechsler-Martell. You know, look in the episode description for the spelling. I won't bother.
We'll have a link.
Right. You can find me on Facebook. I'm pretty chill. I also, you know, occasionally, when it happens that I make a short project or something, there's a hyphen movies. That's the word hyphen spelt out on Facebook. There's a Facebook hyphen movies page. That's also, I think, the YouTube channel is hyphen movies. I'm on Instagram as hyphen stunts. That's hyphen spelt out. I'm on Twitter as hyphen stunts, but I'm really random on Twitter, and it's just random stuff. I mean, while you're on YouTube, check out my friend David LaValle Jr., because sometimes I pop up in his videos, but he also just makes awesome stunt action-y content. You guys should check out like Strikeout 1 and 2, great 80s video game vibes. I think you'll enjoy it. I like training at a parkour place called AMP or AM Parkour for Adaptive Movement Parkour. I think their website is amparkour.com. I've been training Hapkido at Master Cho's Martial Arts in Willimantic. If anybody's in that area, they should totally check it out. I think Master Cho's Martial Arts has a Facebook page as well. Hapkido is a lot of fun. It's an art I was wanting to learn for a long time, and excited that I finally got that chance, that there was a school nearby.
If you want to hear more about adaptive movement parkour, we talked with them years ago.
Scott Hoffman.
Oh, really? Oh, what,
Yeah.
you Scott?
I completely. Paul's like, oh, what? Could I have some episodes to like get a feel for the show? Completely forgot. Like one of his best friends did an episode. So the episode was like hype for his Kickstarter when he was opening AMP. That was back in March of 2016. That is episode 209, and he talks about teaching kids and training and getting the studio set up and being physical and, you know, trying to run a business of doing parkour and everything. It was a lot of fun. He's like super positive, like a really fun, positive person.
Oh yeah, Scott's the best. Scott also, I mean, you know, is Scott's one of those people who has his hands in a lot of things. So he was doing stunts for a while, moved to focusing on just parkour for a while, and it's kind of transitioned back. He gets on set sometimes as well. He's been on, and you can IMDb him as well and see what he's been up to the last couple of years.
Watching, I guess, real briefly, watching some of his like I guess not demos, but like they're trying stuff out now that they have his own studio and his own, you know, place to do stuff, and they could rig stuff from the ceiling. And I saw them trying some rigging things of, kick someone and they fly back, a bunch of feet and slam into a wall, or have a rope spin someone like Rebecca Romaine from the first X-Men, how she's like squatting and like spins this standing thing. How important is like mathematics in figuring out rigging, how you do a descent but don't actually hit the ground and all that kind of stuff? Just seeing images of like how a rope is coiled through someone's harness, and like, oh, we have to make sure their weight is correct and that the length of, there might be some stretch in the line. And I'm like, that's terrifying math to me.
Yes. Well, yeah, terrifying math and terrifying mechanics. And I mean, Bob Harvey one time showed me, he was like, here's the book on rigging that taught me everything I knew. And it was, the size of like 2 dictionaries. It was huge. But yeah, I mean, math is huge with that. You have to calculate all this stuff. And then obviously there's part of it that changes. I forget because rigging is not really my specialty, but there's a lot of where you put the pick up in the ceiling and where you attach the pick to the person. And some of the apparatuses that you use will sometimes change. So you're on a 2-to-1 ratio or a 3-to-1 ratio, and then you need to change that. Sometimes, on a big set, if you're lucky, they'll at least do bag tests first, where they'll send a bag through. I was listening to another podcast where they were talking about the G.I. Joe, the second one, the better one, where they do the repelling ninja fight scene.
Yeah.
They were talking about they spent a long time on that fight scene in a studio, and one of the guys was saying they like did the bag test. The bag just like dropped to the ground, and then for whatever reason they're like, all right, who's next? And it was like 40 feet or something. And there was one guy who had like, for whatever reason, had like gotten out of every bad gig thus far that week. And he was like, well, guess it's my turn. We'll see what happens. Aww. And, he was fine, but it was just one of those things.
It's almost like which member of Jackass is doing this stunt now?
Yes. Yeah, it was exactly like that. Yeah.
It's your turn, Bam.
Right. Not that I would often compare Jackass to stunts, but in this case, yes.
No, it's not a real comparison.
Right.
Paul, it has been great catching up. Thank you so much for coming on and doing this. It's been a lot of fun learning how to control doing damage and making it look making pain look beautiful and also realistic. This has been a lot of fun, man. Thanks again.
Oh, no problem. Thank you guys for having me. This was tons of fun. I'll have to do an episode just on like WMAC Masters.
Dude, man, I could start an entire new podcast on WMAC Masters.
Oh, we could. The Masters of WMAC Masters.
That's what it is. That would be the name. Yeah, I'm gonna buy the website right now. So
there you go.
All right, this has been great. Thanks again, Paul. Go and check out. I mean, honestly, if you want to see Paul, you can go watch Daredevil. You can see him there. You can see Paul die. It's always a good time. I don't know what I'm talking about. So this has been great, Paul. Thanks again. I think I'm going to end this now. So until next week. Or next time, not next week. We haven't done this weekly in a while. Until next time, I have been JR.
I'm Alex.
I'm Paul.
And this has been episode 432 of Opinions May Vary. Hey everyone, if you liked that episode, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Opinions May Vary, and on Twitter and YouTube at OMV Podcast. You can also find us on Spotify or on our very own website at omvpodcast.com. And if you're looking for merch, we have stickers and pins available over at omvpodcast.bigcartel.com while supplies last. As always, thank you so much for listening. Let us know what you thought in the comments, and we will see you next time.